Well, it's that time of year again when everyone's coming out with their top 10 lists of the best action figures of 2023. Well, I haven't collected a lot of modern action figures this year, so I thought I would just do a top 10 list of my favourite toy pickups of the year. I have collected some modern stuff, but I've decided to keep this list exclusively to vintage because this channel was built on videos about vintage action figures. So here are my top 10 toy pickups of 2023. Stay tuned.
Come with me, toy fans.
Hey toy fans, my name is Tony and welcome back to the Analog Toys YouTube channel. And kicking us off in the number 10 slot is the Dreadn Cycle from the G.I. Joe A Real American Hero toy line. The reason I decided to include this particular toy on the list is because I have a very vivid childhood memory of this toy. When my family emigrated to Australia in 1988, we flew to Australia with Singapore Airlines. So my parents decided to stay in Singapore for 5 nights. And while we were there, they took me out to this enormous Toys R Us on Orchard Street in the middle of downtown Singapore. I mean, Singapore's a country. What's the city called? I don't know. Whatever. But when I was in that toy store, I was seeing all these action figures on the shelves that I knew as Action Force International Heroes, but they had the G.I. Joe logo on all the card backs and all of the box packaging. And that was the first time I put 2 and 2 together that Action Force International Heroes in the UK was the same thing as G.I. Joe A Real American Hero. And I'm sure at the time I probably asked my parents for something a lot bigger and more expensive than the Dreadn Cycle, but they were on a budget, we were traveling, they couldn't buy anything too big. So they ended up picking up this. I also got Xandar, and I remember playing with this toy around the swimming pool. And when I stumbled across this on eBay recently, it was nice and complete for a decent price. I was actually looking for something else, but because it immediately reminded me of those amazing 5 days I spent with my family, I was 11 years old at the time, I wanted to add this back into the collection, so that's why I picked the Dreadn Cycle for this list today. Alright, coming in at number 9 is one of the action figures that I picked up at Joe Fest 2023, and that is Whip Action Warhawk. Whip Action Warhawk is from the very rare second wave of the Coleco Rambo toy line. I had a large number of the Wave 1 action figures in childhood. I had like all of the members of Savage and Rambo and Troutman from the Force of Freedoms. That's like 8 out of the 12 figures. And I've since gone out and collected the entirety of Wave 1. But I've always been put off by collecting Wave 2 because it's so rare, it makes it very, very expensive. And when I found this particular action figure at Joe Fest for a bargain price, I couldn't pass it up. This is a character that appeared in the original wave. He was dressed in an all blue uniform. Now he's dressed in a uniform where it's like a blue top and desert tan pants. And he's got a whip action. And something else that Coleco did when they transitioned from Wave 1 of this toy line into Wave 2 is they gave the figures elbow joints. And as expensive as Wave 2 is, I'm still tempted to go out and collect those figures now that I have Whip Action Warhawk. I definitely want to get Snakebite one day, Chief. Not too worried about Touchdown Jackson, but I'm glad that I've got Whip Action Warhawk in the collection. Alright, coming in at number 8 is a very recent acquisition that came from a supporter of the channel named Evander. And that is this reproduction of the vintage French Action Man, which was called Action Joe. It's the Israeli paratrooper. This is quite a legendary set among Action Man collector circles. Because it was only available in France, it makes it quite difficult to acquire. It wasn't produced in the same kind of numbers as Action Man items that Palitoy would produce for the UK market. So that makes it not only scarce, but very desirable because it's quite a cool set. The outfit's got some really cool embellishments on the short sleeve shirt. He comes with a set of this injection molded flexible PVC webbing, and this is the only Action Man item to ever come with that classic 80s weapon, the Uzi. Now Palitoy did have plans to produce an Uzi for the line as part of the Small Arms series, but they never followed through with those plans. So the only way to get an Uzi for your Action Man back in those days was to acquire this French-only release of the Israeli paratrooper uniform. And when Evander sent me this toy, it also came in this beautiful window boxed package. These items are produced by a company called Captain Cosmos, and they are reproducing a lot of vintage French Action Joe items from back in the day. So while technically not vintage, it's reproduced. It is based on a vintage figure, so I'll allow it for this list. Taking the number 7 slot on this list is Endor Luke from that last 17 wave of Kenner action figures. I picked up this particular action figure only a couple of months ago on eBay. I stumbled across the figure in really, really good condition and complete. Anything from the last 17 is pricey. I have been slowly trying to complete the last 17 action figures. It's kind of a goal of mine for 2024 to finish out the original Kenner action figure run. And there are obviously some issues with this original figure because the helmet's not removable, which means when you take off the poncho, you don't even have like a Death Star dual Luke. Don't know why they didn't do the removable helmet because that did come with the Endor Leia figure. But anyway, it's still a vintage Kenner action figure that I didn't have in the collection. It wasn't cheap, but I certainly didn't pay like full aftermarket price for it. I was happy with the price. It's very good condition and I'm very pleased to add another last 17 action figure to my vintage Star Wars collection. Okay, at number 6 is Rondo from the G.I. Joe A Real American Hero toy line. And you might be wondering why I would have Rondo on this list, because it's not like a super rare figure or anything like that. But the thing is, I've now completed the Palitoy Action Force version of Rondo. And even though in 1985, Palitoy was taking a lot of those early Joes from like 83, 84, repackaging them on Action Force card backs and selling them in the UK. One of the action figures that they introduced but did not sell on a card back was Rondo. That's because they decided to package him with a recolored Silent Attack kayak. Now the Silent Attack kayak was originally part of the SAS team from the previous years. That toy was all black with some yellow stickers with the classic Palitoy Action Force SAS logo. And I've had this toy in the collection for quite some time, but it wasn't until recently when a supporter of the channel named George Aitken, I'm sure you all remember George Aitken by now, he's donated some incredible stuff to this channel over the years. Thank you very much, George. Hope you had a Merry Christmas. George recently sent me the correct brown coloured paddle for this. So even though you can see the figure on the box here is actually holding a black paddle for this kayak, the actual toy, when it was released, came with a brown paddle that matched the colour of the kayak released in 1985. I do need to find some reproduction stickers to kind of finish out this toy. There are a few stickers missing from this piece, but it's such a rare and interesting piece of both G.I. Joe and Action Force history. I'm really pleased to finally have the complete, all the toy and all of the accessories. I'm not worried about the stickers. I'll replace those later, but I'm really happy to have this in the collection in 2023. Now at number 5, we've got a collection of carded figures that if you watch my kind of Joe Fest recap video from this year, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. But I stumbled across a treasure trove of carded Action Force figures in Augusta, Georgia at this year's Joe Fest convention. And I came home with these 4 really nice carded Series 1 action figures. I got the Orange Frogman, the British Marine, the German Stormtrooper, and the exceedingly rare Australian Jungle Fighter. Now at that time, this particular seller at Joe Fest had well over 20 carded Action Force items on the table. And I kind of rushed back after first discovering them, rushed back to the Valaverse booth, spoke to Bobby and said, hey, we need to go and check out this booth and pick up all of these action figures. I think we need to just go and buy the whole damn lot. I was happy with the 4 Series 1 carded figures I got. I was tempted to get a few more, but I was worried about how I was going to safely get them all into my suitcase and get them back to Australia. And, Bobby's got more money than me, so I let him take the rest of them. But this was not only one of the best pickups of 2023, but an absolute find of a collecting lifetime. I can't believe, particularly with how rare that Australian Jungle Fighter is, not just loose, but particularly carded. I've heard stories that there are maybe only half a dozen or 8 of these Australian Jungle Fighters carded known to exist in the world. But the fact that I got it for such a bargain price, it's what toy collecting dreams are made of. Now, my 4th best toy pickup of 2023 was an incredible gift from an amazing friend who goes by the name of Drew G. Anyone who follows the channel and does the live streams, you'll always see Drew in the live chat. Great guy. I met him at Joe Fest 2022 and we got along really well and we kind of reconnected again at Joe Fest 2023. And he knew that I was on the hunt for a vintage Dagobah playset. And I had been hunting around Joe Fest and also had been to a couple of other like antique malls and toy stores in the States before Joe Fest. And I had come across a few vintage Kenner Star Wars Dagobah playsets, but they were all missing the elusive R2-D2 butt plug. Well, Drew G had, by some sheer stroke of luck, come across a completely mint boxed version of this toy. It even has the foam for the swamp. Like, it's all deteriorated, but it's there in a plastic baggie. I was happy to, cut up a bit of fresh foam and replace it. But this item was in a beautiful box, absolutely mint, has all of the accessories, particularly that elusive silver cylinder that goes up R2-D2's, keister. But the fact that such a good friend gifted this to me because he knew I wanted this for an upcoming video, a video that will be coming in 2024, but I'm waiting on a certain figure from Stan Solo to get released. As soon as that figure arrives, I'm doing this bumper video about all of the Kenner Dagobah toys. Drew G, thanks again, man. Love you, bro. That was an amazing gift and you blew me away. And I'm so pleased I didn't end up biting the bullet on some of those other Dagobah play sets I was going to purchase that were missing that one crucial item. All right, at number 3, I've kind of got a small collection of figures here that I'm going to bundle all in together. As you know, one of the biggest videos I made this year was my review of the G.I. Joe Classified Big Ben. Now, it's not the G.I. Joe Classified Big Ben that's on this list. As I said, there's no modern on this list today. But I actually picked up a bunch of vintage carded Big Ben action figures. Now, this all started when the only version of Big Ben that I didn't own was the Collectors Club exclusive, the 4-inch, modern articulated Big Ben. And I wanted to acquire that piece before I made the Big Ben video. Now, the best one that I could find on eBay was actually a carded example where the glue had completely dried off and the bubble had fallen off the card and barely damaged the card in the process. So I thought, I can acquire that piece, take the loose figure out of the bubble, film the video, then put the figure back into the bubble, glue the bubble back onto the card, and now I've got that Collectors Club exclusive figure carded. So I then went out and decided to add on to that, and I picked up this special collector's edition of Big Ben and Whiteout in a 2-pack because this is my second favourite version of Big Ben when he is in all of the Arctic gear. But I didn't stop there. I was determined to acquire a vintage carded Big Ben, an original Big Ben from 1991. And I ended up getting this really nice example for not a bad price because the bubble had very carefully been lifted because the seller told me that the O-ring had rotted and the figure had kind of fallen apart in the bubble. That's one of the drawbacks of collecting, mint carded G.I. Joe action figures. So he very carefully opened the side of the bubble to replace the O-ring, which now makes for a much more displayable piece. And I don't really care that the bubble's been carefully opened. I mean, look, it looks like a beautiful carded 1991 Big Ben G.I. Joe action figure. And the fact that this was about $80 cheaper than the going rate of a mint sealed one, I'm more than happy to add this to the collection. So these 3 carded vintage Big Bens are number 3 on the list of my favourite toy pickups of 2023. Now at number 2, we have a really epic toy that was also another very kind donation to the channel. And this came from mvargo97. I did an unboxing video of this earlier in the year when this amazing man gifted me a mint and complete G.I. Joe Killer Whale. The Killer Whale is one of those legendary G.I. Joe vehicles. I mean, I ranked it as the best G.I. Joe vehicle of all time on my top 10 G.I. Joe vehicles list video earlier in the year. And mvargo sent me a killer example, like great condition. It didn't have many stickers on it, but he was also kind enough to include a set of reproduction stickers that I've used to, make this toy kind of pop on the display shelf. And I have plans to make a dedicated video about the Killer Whale. And I went out to film some footage a few weeks ago where I actually had the Killer Whale out in the wild, floating down a crocodile-infested creek here in Australia. But unfortunately, not all the footage came out as well as I would hope. So that video is still going to happen in 2024, but I need to rethink how I'm going to do that because I spent several hours getting smashed by mosquitoes, filming this toy in the wild, getting it all covered in salt water, which is not a good idea with vintage toys. But I'm determined to get that video done in 2024 and dedicate that video to mvargo. But for now, I just have to realised that the efforts I put in that day were kind of a waste of time and I had to move on to some other content. Now, before we reveal our top toy pickup of 2023, I want to take a moment to discuss some of the toys that I'm looking to acquire in 2024. I've already mentioned earlier in this video that I'm determined to complete the entire vintage Kenner Star Wars run of action figures. So I've got about 7 figures from the last 17 that I still need to acquire. But 3 other figures that I need to fill out that collection because they weren't available loose carded, so they kind of get left off a few people's lists, is the Max Rebo band. Now, I owned a Max Rebo band, mint and complete, a number of years ago. When I say mint and complete, like it was mint boxed. But I didn't want to have them boxed. I wanted them loose, and I didn't want to open up this vintage toy package. So I moved that on to another collector, and I've been since waiting to reacquire a Max Rebo band. I'm looking at a couple on eBay at the moment. It's very challenging to get the blue figure that doesn't have, you know, very faded arms. I'm not too worried. I don't mind getting a faded one in the collection. That's just part and parcel of vintage toy collecting these days. Some of the items that we really want just don't pass the test of time. I could spend an absolute fortune going out and finding one that's never seen a shred of UV light or sunlight in the past and is completely blue, and I guarantee you 6 months after I own it, it'll fade, and I would have wasted, you know, all of that extra money that I stumped up for it. All right, so coming in at number 1 is my Action Man Holy Grail that arrived earlier this year. I did an unboxing video, then I did a whole feature, not just about this toy, but about the Action Man Emergency series, and that is the Action Man Fire Tender. This is an incredibly rare piece. It is very, very fragile. It goes for an extortionate amount of money on the secondary market. And I was able to pick this up from Leicester Vintage Toys. You may know those guys from the Toy Shop on Tour YouTube channel. And the owner, Joe, did me a great deal on this piece. The only issue with this toy when I received it from Joe, and I was well aware of this, I'm not suggesting that, you know, I made this transaction with Leicester Vintage Toy Shop and they didn't disclose some key information. I was well aware. But this item didn't have the fire axe included. And I had to go out on eBay, and I fortunately found one of them, and that still cost me like 35 quid. You know, that's in Australian dollars, it was like $50 for this one plastic accessory. But it's a legendary item in immaculate condition. You don't find them like this, with a beautiful box. And I think it's the only vintage Action Man vehicle box I own that doesn't have the stars cut out. Because all of these boxes back in the day had 10 stars, which you could collect up to send away for free Action Man figures. And you only needed 20 stars to get that Action Man figure. And with 10 stars coming on most of the vehicle boxes, even shop owners would cut them out before they sold the vehicles, send away 2 lots of stars from 2 vehicles they had on their store shelves, and get a free Action Man that they could then resell. So very, very few of these boxes have survived completely untouched. It's a legendary piece. It was a holy grail of mine for a long time, and I'm just overjoyed that I was able to add this to my collection in 2023. Now, before I sign off, I'm really interested to know what were some of your favourite toy pickups in 2023. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.